So, good evening, everybody, once again, and welcome back to this day 7 of Civil's Daily Answer Wars and Daily Answer Wars Prime. So, I think once again, all of you have written a lot of answers today and posted in the Telegram group. In the morning, a question was given, and I think all of you are enjoying this initiative. There have also been a lot number of peer reviews, and many of you are participating in a pretty manner. So I hope that again the Josh is back after a break yesterday. We had a break yesterday because of Christmas and Sunday, and again we are back today with a new topic in the morning, and we will be discussing that topic today in this session. And after that, we will try to go for evaluating some of the copies. Meanwhile, if you have any doubts, you can ask me in the chat box. Good evening, Harji. So today's question was from GS1. This is the first time that we have picked up GS1 in this initiative. So I think GS1 is also pretty important GS paper, and I think there is enough scope for scoring good marks in GS1 if you write good answers, because GS1 is more or less static in nature, and whatever questions are asked, most of those are read earlier only. It is nothing new, not very much new things come in GS1. In geography part, some questions sometimes come which are a bit unpredictable, but history and art and culture mostly are scoring topics in which you can just if you are thorough with your content and static knowledge, you can score good marks. So we had started with art and culture today, and the first question was basically about temple architecture, and this is quite a common topic for UPSC, I will say. Some of the topics in art and culture are pretty common. For example, this differentiating between temple architectures, movements such as Bhakti and Sufi, questions on Buddhism and Jainism. So these things, I think you should be well prepared in advance so that you don't waste your time or spend time overthinking in the exam hall. Most important is that you remember at least the basics of these topics so that you can start writing straight away whatever is asked in the exam hall. So today's question was basically compare and contrast the elements of Nagara and Dravida schools of temple architecture. So as all of us know that these are two most prominent schools of architecture. Nagara was in the North Indian School of Architecture, and Dravida was basically the South Indian School of Temple Architecture. And also there was a school called Vesara School of Temple Architecture that you could say basically in Hoysala period, and in that time it came into prominence, and it was basically you can say south of India only, but it had elements from both these schools. So that is not asked, but here you just need to talk about this Nagara and Dravida. What you needed to talk, what the demand of the question was, to compare and contrast. In these type of questions, I think you need to talk both about similarities and the differences. So compare will be talking about some of the similarities between both these schools, and the contrast part will be like talking about the differences between these schools of temple architecture. So that was the core demand of the question. There was no need of way forward and all in such questions, and you could have just started with a generic introduction talking about where Nagara school of architecture was prominent, where Dravida school was prominent, and then go on to the topic straight away, talk about the similarities, talk about the differences. Yeah, presentation could have been a better. You can draw a table, draw some diagrams. Always try to throw in some diagrams in GS1 paper. For example, geography. In geography, there's always the scope of a diagram. In art and culture also, you can simplify your diagrams. For example, in the book Nitin Singhania, you will find the diagrams of temple architecture in a pretty simple manner. So you can pick it from there and just you can draw those diagrams whenever such questions are asked. So now let us move to the answer, like what all we could have written. So in the introduction, I have just started with the basic introduction, like Nagara style is a style of temple architecture that is associated with the temple building practices generally seen north of the Vindhyas. Now, Vindhyas are basically, you can say, divides India between north and south. And northern part of India is prominent for Nagara style of temple architecture. So I've talked about that. Next, I have mentioned about the space of Dravida school of temple architecture. It refers to temple building practices in Dravidian region in southern India. So this was a very basic generic introduction which all of you could have written pretty quite easily. After that, I move on to talk about the similarities between both these styles. So here you needed to include some examples also and talk about the more or less. You need not get into details a lot of. Just you need to talk about the main points, because this was again just a 10 marker. So You need not to go into a lot of details. If you have 3 or 4 points in both the parts, I think that will be enough for this answer. So in similarities, we can talk about the plan of temple architecture. If you look at the plan of the temples, it looks quite similar, and some of the terms used are also like common. For example, Vastu Purush, Brahmapad for Sanctum Sanctorum are used in both parts of both in Dravidian and Nagara style of temple architecture. So you can use these terms when we talk about elevation. So in both architecture, you can see that the Sikhar and Viman, both of these rises like a vertically like a mountain. So basically, what happens? The broad base. Where from where these things rise is a bit broad, and then it goes on to narrow down in both these Nagara and Dravida styles. However, there is a difference also. Like basically, the Nagara style of architecture has a curvilinear type of Viman, whereas in the southern temples or Dravidian style temples, it has a pyramidal structure. But you need not mention that. The concept just could have been mentioned that the Sanctum Sanctorum in both styles rises vertically like a mountain in a narrowing tower. After that, I've talked about some of the common features of both these temples, which are pretty like usual. For example, these are pillared mandapa. Like this was basically a hall for seating arrangements and prayers and all. Sacred pool of water. It is seen in both parts of the country. Parikrama path is like the circumambulation path around the Garbhagriha or the Sanctum Sanctorum. Nandi Mandapa in Saiva temples, in like Nandi is the vehicle of you can say God, Lord Shiva. So it is also prominent in both Nagara and Dravida styles. So Nandi Mandapa is also common. So these you could have talked about. Next, this is a pretty generic point about sculptures, because this is pretty famous also, that a lot of sculptures are drawn in our temples. If you have visited by chance some of the temples in both South India and North India, you can pretty easily write about this, because sculptures are there in both parts of the country. Now, next, I've talked about patronage of ruling dynasties. For example, these Khajuraho temples were built by the Chandela rulers, and it is prominently patronized in those temples. Also, the Vijayanagar temples, especially in the Hampi region, are also patronized by the Vijayanagar kingdom. So you can talk about that. Next, generic point once again, assimilative character is visible through inclusion of attendant deities and multi-religious nature. For example, whenever you visit these temples, you'll find multiple shrines in some of the temples in both parts of the country for like you can say subsidiary deities, although there are no subsidiary deities as such, but like not the most prominent deity. So for them, there are multiple shrines and all. So Sakta, Saiva, and Vaisnava worship in the same temple is observed, like different deities are there. So you can talk about this assimilative character. So I think these are pretty decent and simple points which you all of you could have written. Especially if you don't write about this assimilative character, you could have talked about ruling dynasties, you could have talked about sculptures, and you could have talked about plan, elevation, and some of the common features. These first 5 points are pretty easy to write, and I think you should have written that. Next, we move on to the differences between the Nagara and Dravida school of temple architecture. So, when we talk about differences, first difference I already told you. For example, in this central tower, the Sikhara is curvilinear and the tallest element in the temple architecture. This is basically a bit of cylindrical in shape, you can see, and although both of them rises from the bottom, but this is a bit curvilinear, whereas in Dravida, it is this Viman is pyramidal in shape. It is often smaller in size than the gateway to the temple. Now, gateway to the temple is a prominent feature of South Indian Dravidian style of architecture, and these are pretty large gateways. Gopurams are pretty grand. So, according to them, these Sikhars are these Vimanas are a bit smaller in size than the gateways. But again, you could have mentioned some examples here. Example is Meenakshi Temple at Madurai. It is a very famous example, and you could have talked about this. Next, in the Nagara style, there are multiple towers with mandapas also having towering elevation. Example, Solanki style temple, Jagmohana in Jagannath style temple. So this is basically the Orisian temples. In there also you can find that there are very much pillared halls, multiple towers are there present, and that too after like there is elevation staircase is present in all of these temples for these mandapas. So you can talk about that. Whereas in the South Indian temples or the Dravidian temple architecture, mandapas have flat roofs. So no lot of towers are not present in southern temples. So you can talk about that. Boundaries are usually lacking in Nagara style temples, they are standalone structures, whereas the Dravidian style temple architectures are pretty like enclosed, walled enclosures are there. Pretty complex type structure is there. A whole complex is built. Boundary walls are there. Gateways are there. So you can talk about that, which can extend into multiple layers, each with magnificent gateways. So you could have mentioned this again. Next, the temple premises are used for religious and cultural purposes. So you can talk about that, talk about this also. However, this point is a bit, you need to be a bit innovative here, because temple premises are used for these purposes in both parts of the country. However, in South India, many administrative and economic uses are there other than the religious and spiritual or cultural uses. So that is a point of difference that I have tried to point out here. Religious and cultural purposes means they are related to just the worship and all part in northern India, whereas in South India they are pretty much assimilated in the social and administrative life of the people. As you can see from recent examples also, most of the temples in South India are pretty rich. For example, the Padmanabhapuram in temple in Kerala, in Tirupati, temples in Tirupati, all of them have a lot of wealth, and because they have always been like economically pretty prominent. Many economic activities have taken place from there. So those temples are have both administrative and economic uses, along with being places of worship, whereas this feature is seen less in North Indian temples. Next, the presiding deity is placed inside and not outside the Garbhagriha. So most of the deities in North Indian temples, because basically they are standalone structures, are inside the Garbhagriha, whereas in the Dravida style of architecture, some of the Utsav Murtis, you can say, are present outside the Garbhagriha also. Although the main deity is present in the Garbhagriha, but other deities are present in the form of Utsav Murtis outside the Garbhagriha. You can talk about this also. Now, next point is about Amalaka. So this is the Amalaka. You can see in this diagram a small circular type of structure over this Sikhar. You can say is the Amalaka. So unique elements like Amalaka are present. This is not there in Dravidian style of temple architecture. Here you can find this octagonal cupola called stupika. So this octagonal cupola is the dome shaped, like it is octagonal in shape, and above the Sikhara it is present, and both of these are different things. So you can talk about the difference here between Amalaka and Stupika. So these things are there. After that, this diagram I have basically picked from the books only. So you can pretty easily draw these diagrams. These are basically line diagrams. Simpler diagrams than this can also be drawn, but try to draw a diagram, because that ensures some more marks, and it also pretty clearly points out the difference between the temples. For example, these gopurams and all, you can pretty clearly show, and this clearly shows that this is a pretty complex type structure, whereas this is not a complex type structure. These are standalone temples, and some of the markings also you can do. For example, what I have done in this answer. So this was basically the differences part. Some if you had drawn the diagram, you would have got some extra marks. Other than that, the most prominent things like these towers, curvilinear and tallest element, Sikhara, difference between Sikhar and Viman, some examples of both the differences in both styles of temple architecture, talking about gopurams and outer boundaries absent in North Indian temples. These 3-4 points were pretty prominent, which you should have mentioned. After that, if you had drawn a diagram and missed 1 or 2 points, that would not have mattered if you had drawn a diagram. Next, we move to the conclusion part. So, Dravida and Nagara style of temple architecture are the major temple building principles which have affected each other, as seen in Jagannath temple, marked by temple enclosure, or in the Vesara style. So, again, I have talked about this. So, Vesara style draws basically from both these types of temple architecture, and you can say that this is a combination of these two styles, and you can introduce it in the conclusion here. This is not a new concept, but this is derived from these two, and to conclude, you can mention this. Together, they represent pinnacle of Indian craftsmanship, skills, art, and philosophy. So again, this conclusion was also pretty simple, which you could have mentioned. And main issue in this answer was talking about the similarities, talking about the differences, drawing a diagram, and ensuring that you have enough content to write. Because if you did not have content, this answer would have gone haywire. You could not have written many things, and that would have again resulted in the loss of marks. So 3-4 points in both parts. Ensuring to draw a diagram and writing a generic introduction and conclusion would have fetched you pretty good marks, in this question. So I think that was it for this answer. I will attach this PDF in the Telegram group, and now I move on to evaluating, checking some of the copies and see what all you have written. So let us move to research copy first. To compare and contrast the elements of Nagara. Okay, the temples located in northern India are classified as Nagara style, whereas temples located in southern India are classified as Dravidian style. So this is fine. Major difference between the elements of both style of. Okay, so here I think first you need to talk about the similarities. Here Rishabh has missed the similarities part, I guess. Let me check whether he has written it or not. No, so similarities are also required in this answer. So if you don't write it, some marks will be lost, because compare is also written. It is not just about contrasting. Otherwise, if you had to write only differences, they will just mention contrast. So for that you will lose some marks. Otherwise, let us see. They have multiple sikharas. They have only one sikhara. So actually, sikhar is not there in Dravidian style. So you can differentiate it by saying sikhar and viman. So those are two different names given for that structure. They have multiple towers. They have always a single tower. This is fine. Or you can talk about flat roofs. Central tower are generally curvilinear shape. This is fine. So shaped like a pyramid. The prominent element in the style Sikhara. Most prominent element is the Gopuram. Okay, in this style, at the entrance of Sanctum Sanctorum, Ganga and Yamuna are depicted in personified form. Entrances of temples of style of Arc and Dwarpala. This is also okay. In this style, there is not much importance given to the temple boundaries. This is fine. In this style, temple boundaries are given high importance. Okay, pedestals are generally higher than the ground. This pedestal, no, elevation is there in both the temples. I'll say, yeah, in some of the temples, pedestals are at ground level, but this is not a very good differentiating point. In this style, the deities are inside. In this, deities are outside. Again, you can talk about Utsav Murtis here. Try to introduce some of the keywords, like key terms. Use the terms that are used in temple architecture. For example, you can talk about mandapas. You can talk about Utsav Murtis in place of saying that deities are outside. For example, in this answer, I think some of the keywords I will show you. For example, you can talk about use, just writing gateways is not enough. You can use the word Gopurams. You can use the give some examples which you have missed, I guess. Then you can talk about uh, other examples. For example, here you can talk about Utsav Murti, Stupika, Amalaka. Try to use these terms, because since you know, you have the knowledge of these terms, this will make your answer more beautiful. Other than that, I think most of the things that you have mentioned are fine. And the diagram also is decent. Same diagram you have also drawn, I guess. So that will be good. And try to draw a Gopuram here. It will be better. The Sun Temple at Konark is the best specimen of Nagara style of architecture. Meenakshi Temple. So use examples in the like body itself. In the conclusion, you can talk about praise both the styles. Basically, you can say that both the Nagara and Dravida styles are pretty good, and like they show craftsmanship of Indian architecture and sculpture and all of that. So praise both those styles of architecture in the conclusion, and examples can be used in the initial part. Differences are okay. Just you need to mention some of the keywords. Similarities in this answer are missing, and the diagram is also okay. So I think overall 3.5 out of 10 you will get reserve in this answer. Next we move to Manuj Ansu's answer. Nagara and Dravida schools of temple architecture are the two most prominent styles. There may many similarities and differences based on geographical, ethnic, and historic differences. Okay. So again, this is good. A diagram needs to be drawn. So good that you have done it. Similarities are also mentioned, both developed with the help of respective dynasties. Okay, this I have talked about. Similar features is also good. Yeah, so use these terms. That is good. Heavily engraved with sculptures depicting the social structure of the temple. This is also fine. Uh, so overall, ठीक है, like most of the points are there. One or two more points can be added in similarities. For example, about the construction of the temple. For example, what you have done is you have talked about dynasties, what they depict, and all. In these features, some more points can be talked about, like Sikhar and Viman, all of them like uh, being similar in concept. Those things you can mention in this features. Otherwise, all of these things are fine. Next, we move on to the differences. This diagram is not required here, because if you I don't think you will get so much of time to spare for a 10 marker that you draw 3 4 diagrams in one answer. If you just draw the two diagrams, that will be enough. And also this is not pretty clear, like Okay, you have marked it. So okay, you can draw it, but I will say avoid it because that will you will end up giving a lot of time to one answer only. Differences can be presented more in a tabular form. That will be better. Nagara, this is okay, but this you have mentioned in the introduction only, so no need to again talk about this space. Compound walls is fine. Crown is okay. Vimana, curvilinear, multiple step parameter, entrance images of Mithuna, Ganga, and Yamuna, images of Dwarpalas, Nagara may not may not have temple tanks, but Dravida has a okay pedestal higher than ground at ground level. Okay, temples of India signify the richness of Indian culture, thus their architecture marvels inspired. So okay, so this answer is pretty good, I think. Most of the things are mentioned. Some of the examples you could have just integrated here in these differences only, and no need to draw this. Other than that, you could have drawn a table and explained the differences in that tabular format. And the similarities and these diagrams and introduction are pretty good. So I think you will get 5.5 out of 10 in this answer, Manu Jansu. Good answer, I will say. Next, I move to Nishant's copy. From 5th century AD onwards, a distinct form of temple construction known as Nagara style of architecture emerged in North India, while hundreds of temples were built in South India under the patronage of Chola rulers. Comparison. So, talk about Dravidian style. It is not just about Chola rulers. Some of the temples in Dravidian style have not been made by Chola rulers, but are pretty famous and pretty like original examples of Dravidian style of temple architecture. So make that broad. Don't restrict it to the Chola kingdom. Comparison contrasting elements of Nagara and Dravida schools of okay. Location, this is fine. Central tower, Viman, distinguished by beehives at Culminate Tower. Oh, 1 second. Okay. So this you have talked about in that, but only one Sikhara or Viman in this type. Okay, fine. Gopuram is fine. Sikhar is the most prominent feature of Nagara temples and entire usually modest and even absent. Okay, entrance, Dwarpala is fine. This is also good. Pedestals are okay. Boundary is also fine. Boundaries temples of this type feature. Complex boundaries okay. Other features four vestibular tunnel called as Antaralas constructed. So fine. You have used the terms also, but again I think similarities are missing in this answer. So you need to talk about the similarities in both the type of temple architectures also, so that is missing. And also I think diagram could have been drawn in this answer along with some of the examples. So the differences part are well written. I think I'll say you will get very good marks for writing the differences, whatever marks are allotted for that. But some of the main things in this answer are missing, for example diagram similarities and some examples, so you will lose marks for that. The majority the art and architectural relics from ancient medieval modern day are religious in nature. Both the Nagar and Dravidian style of architecture was from earlier panchayatan form, so this is fine, this will do. So I think again you will get 3 out of 10 for this answer, Nishant. Try to incorporate, like I will say, all parts of whatever has been asked. Whenever the question is, try to go through the keywords. Identify the tail words first. What all they are asking, if what the question is saying, to critically discuss, or to compare and contrast, or to elaborate, or to examine, and then uh, keep a framework in mind. Whenever compare and contrast, you see, you automatically understand that both similarities and differences need to be written in this answer. If there is only contrast, you need to understand that you just need to write the differences. So in that manner, move ahead. Otherwise, the content, whatever you have written, is good, but some things are missing. That is why you will get marks will be deducted a bit. Next, we move to Ranu's copy. Dravidian architecture evolved in the southern Indian subcontinent, also known as South Indian temple style, built under the Chola rulers. Okay, Nagara style. So don't restrict it to again Chola rulers. Nagara style used in North India from the 5th century AD onwards. Okay, fine. Compare similarities. Okay, both Nagara and Dravidian styles of architecture. So this is okay. Both the style of architecture, the buildings were heavily engraved and full of sculptures. So here you can give examples like Khajuraho temple, the sculptures of Hampi. You can talk about the kingdoms or patronage of the ruling dynasties. That is common feature in both the type of temples. You can also talk about some of the features of the temple. For example, the structures of the temple, what all are common, like Garbhagriha, Sanctum Sanctorum is one of the most common features which you can easily write. So those things, whatever you remember, you can write about that. Other than that, these whatever 2 3 points you have written are good. Some examples would have been better. Contrast is fine. Location, central tower is okay. Entrance sculpture okay. The Ganga Yamuna personified. Pedestals at ground level, taller than ground. Boundary complex boundaries less emphasized. Okay. So this is fine. Again, here you can draw the uh, I will say the Gopurams and all, because that is one of the most important feature of southern style temples. Northern style is also fine, good that you have drawn this. Try to use these terms in the answer also. For example, you can talk about Amalaka and the domes type cupola present in these temples. So you can talk about these things in the answer, in the body of the answer also. So the good that you have mentioned these examples. This is good. The majority of the art and architecture relics from ancient, medieval, and modern India are religious in nature. Their development can be broken down into three stages: simple pillars of structures, more carvings, pillars. So I don't think conclusion could be a bit better. First of all, don't restrict. In conclusion, you need to take a broader view. For example, जैसे most of the sculpture and architecture, you need to basically praise them, like they are good, and also don't restrict it to saying just they are religious. For example, you can see many secular images in the temple also, so no need to talk about that. Also here, like you are talking about simple pillars and structures, more carving, so these are new points which are trying you are trying to introduce in the conclusion, so no need to do that. In the conclusion, you just say that these are pretty good examples of Indian craftsmanship in the ancient era itself, and all of the you can talk about Vesara, that these temples also inspired a third type of temple architecture called Vesara temple architecture, and all of them represent the rich, glorious heritage of India. So that is fine. So that would be enough, I think. No need to write extra points and talk about something. This line makes your answer look incomplete a bit. So no need to write new points in the conclusion. Other than that, I think most of the points are good. The similarities, you could have added one or two more specific points and mentioned some of the examples. Differences part are good, so I will say you will get 4 out of 10 for this answer, Ranu. Overall, you will get 4 out of 10. Yeah, 4 out of 10 for this answer. The diagram could also have been improved a bit. So that will be it for today, guys. I think I tried to review some of the copies and gave you a, bird's eye view of how the copies are getting evaluated, and how what all you need to do to incorporate to make your answers better. So if you have any doubts, you can ask in this chat box. So again, that will be it for today, guys. Then next we will meet tomorrow with a new set of questions, and a new set of question and new set of topic, and we will discuss again in the evening over that topic. Meanwhile, you all can keep on writing and keep peer reviewing. Keep doing that. Peer reviewing process will also help you understand well. If you want to join this daily mentorship and evaluation program, you can consider joining Warzone Prime. In that, we will try to review your copy every day and also give you a personalized feedback over multiple channels which are available to us, and then uh, I think you can improve in that manner also. Otherwise, again, we will move with this free initiative tomorrow, and we'll come with a new topic. So thank you very much, guys, for today. We'll meet tomorrow again. Bye.